Rev up your engines! Alright, Fox body Mustangs. People either love them or they hate them. Well, here's one I'm assuming a lot of people would love. The old car's a 1990, but it's got the 5-liter V8, and it's in pretty good shape. Believe it or not, it's still with the original buyer. Yes, he's the original owner of this car. And you're not going to believe this, but it's true. It's still got the original clutch. This is still the original clutch on this thing. And it does have this 5-speed transmission too. If you are looking for one of these, take my advice. Always try to get it from an older guy who doesn't beat him up. And here's the older guy who owns this one. He definitely did not beat it up. Yes, it still has the original clutch and 140,000 miles on them. They used to really make them strong. Now this has the infamous 5-liter. They're great engines. They can pull all day long. And obviously in this case, they can last a long time. Now yeah, you're gonna see corrosion. This is a Rhode Island car. It's been here its whole life. But it's superficial corrosion. The vehicle itself is in very solid shape. Check the strut towers. They're strong as can be. They're not rotting away or anything. It's just superficial rust. And if you're looking for a Fox body Mustang, especially like a 1990, you can't do what I suggest for later model Mustangs, which is if you don't drive hard, go ahead and get a V6 engine. They're okay, and if you're not a maniac, you can have fun tootling around in it. But in the case of these, you gotta get the 5-liter V8 because the 4-cylinder engines were rolling piles of garbage. They had a whopping 88 horsepower. They couldn't get out of their own way, and if you had an automatic transmission in one, you might as well be going backwards. Now, by modern standards, the 225 horsepower is nothing outrageous, but it's an HD 225 and it's 300 pound-feet of torque. That's a lot of torque. That's what these things are about, taking off, doing burnouts. They're not race cars. You ever drive a Mustang too fast, you're gonna go around a tree because their weight ratio is wrong for going fast around turns. All the weight's in the front, the back's just gonna spin around. Back in the day, we used to put sandbags or anything heavy in the trunk to weigh it down so it could take the snow and not slide all over the place. Because realize this is old school technology. They got solid rear ends. Heck, it wasn't until rather recently that they put independent suspension systems on Mustangs. They've had solid rear ends, but a lot of guys like the way they drift. Now, as an interesting side story here, the owner in 2015 bought a 2015 Mustang with the independent suspension, but he got rid of it. He hated that 6-speed transmission that was made in China. I had customers with, I had one customer actually went through 3 of them. And then when the 3rd one broke, take it back, Ford. And they actually bought the car back because she said, I can't take this anymore. You didn't build it to hold it. This thing is still working and still has the original clutch on it. He kept this and got rid of the 2015. So that tells you how things have changed. Now, sure, this was the beginning of them making cars with more plastic. I think they look better with chrome and stuff, but hey, by the time this was made, and way back then in 1990, they were going to plastic everything. Oh, you gotta say, plastic doesn't rust. And judging by the state of companies that chrome plate stuff these days, maybe that's a good idea that it's got more plastic, especially here in Rhode Island. I've had guys buy Harleys, they spend a fortune on all this chrome plated stuff, and guess what happens? Like 3 years later, it's all flaking off. People don't understand, chrome is super thin, you know? Tiny, tiny little thousandths of an inch coating. And all it takes is a little crack here or there, the water gets in, it rusts and it flakes off. Maybe not that bad of an idea, considering how poorly people chrome plate stuff these days. Sports day, hey. Still got the original sunroof, and then we go inside. It's a typical Mustang, a utilitarian, and the cloth seat's still in excellent shape. You could fit people in the back seat. It's a lot bigger than some of the cars that I get over here. But of course, it's the engine behind the reasoning of the entire existence of the Mustang. Let's check this one out. But it's 31 years old. Okay, I bet you didn't expect to hear that sound, but that's the guy in a diesel behind me. We'll restart it. No, this thing does not have a diesel engine in it. Let's start it up by itself. Starts right up. The rearview mirror's seen better days. Got a few cracks in it. It's definitely seen better days. It's like It's an old ghost car. It's got these strange little feet coming down where the plastic has warped. But check it out, the plastic's still good. They even made plastic better in those days. Now he's basically done nothing but oil changes, and the only thing that really doesn't work is the air conditioning. It blows, but it doesn't blow cold anymore because it ran out of refrigerant, which is typical. He's maintained the car himself, but he decided to see, well, what's wrong with the AC? So he took it to a mechanic, and the guy showed him that the evaporator's leaking inside the dash. And that, of course, if you know anything about Fords, is the bane of Ford air conditioning systems. You're going to spend thousands of dollars tearing the whole car apart to replace the evaporator cord, just the way Fords have always been. They really don't care. I mean, in my Toyota, I could get that evaporator out in about 20 minutes. But on these, they were just made. So he left it alone. He's in Rhode Island. How hot can it get here? So let's take it for a spin. As we saw before, it starts right up. Still got the original clutch, but goes right into reverse. This isn't one of those horrible gear track transmissions. This is when they actually made them correctly. Now realize it is a Ford Mustang with a solid rear end. They're fun cars to drive. They're not particularly smooth, of course, going down a road. They're a small wheelbase, and with a solid rear end, it's not going to dampen bumps all that well. As we'll see while we're going down Torture Alley here on this Rhode Island road, we're doing a bit of bouncing here. This thing bounces even more than that Tesla did. But it's a Mustang. It's not for going over bumpy roads. It's for having fun and zooming around it. When you're on the highway going flat speeds, it's perfectly fine. Great for cruising along the beach. And let's see what this old girl can still do. It's spinning those tires. There's no arguing that. It's still got all the 225 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque in it. You just heard they're very good at spinning tires. You might think 225 horses isn't all that much. Well, in this little thing with all that torque, it's all anyone really needs. And really, it's just got that Mustang aura to it. And unlike the modern transmission they had in the 2015 Mustang, this baby still shifts smooth as silk. Even though it's got 145,000 miles. Of course, back in the day, they only went to 99,999. So this one's been around once, but he's the original owner, so he knows that. And really, there's just something about Ford V8 engines. Now, regardless of whether you like or hate Fox body Mustangs, they run the same. They still put smiles on your face while you're driving down the road. Now, you can modify these things to your heart content. I had a customer that put 600 horsepower in one. This thing wasn't made for that much horsepower. You can get in trouble with 225 horsepower in the way this car with it spinning around. You put 3 times as much horsepower in, you're gonna have 3 times as much trouble if you really push it. And believe me, you don't need to push it more than this thing will go. So if you're looking for one, just make sure it has that for the 5-liter V8. Because unless you want a granny car, you don't want a Fox body with an 88 horsepower 4-cylinder engine that won't even get out of its own way, especially with an automatic transmission, which most of them have. This very reliable standard transmission, heck, he's still on the original clutch. You could never say that with a modern one. The gearbox itself would have broken. I had a customer went through 3 gearboxes in hers, so they used to really know how to make these things. If you can find an old guy like him who's gonna sell one, hey, jump on the opportunity. But he's not selling his, so you can forget this one. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Justin Shepard says, I'm pretty sure I have a brake fluid leak somewhere in the rear brakes on my 79 Catalina. The pedal sinks. I had more fluid and pumped it. I looked for leaks. I don't see leaks anywhere on the wheels or the line. What could it be? Could it be air? Well, of course it could be air in your system. But let's face it, if you got air in your system, that means you got a leak somewhere that's sucking the air in. So somewhere you got a problem. You're saying you look around, you don't see leaks? The first thing I would suspect would be a bad Brakemaster cylinder, because the master cylinder bolts on to the booster, to the brake booster. If the master cylinder goes back and the seals leak, they'll leak back inside the booster. You won't see anything because the booster's a big old, like 2 pipe plates welded together, and the fluid leaks inside the sealed unit. You won't see it. So my advice there would be, take off the Brakemaster cylinder, look inside the booster. If it's full of fluid and you get a straw or something and you put it in, you pump it out, and fluid comes out, you know you need a master cylinder. You might need a booster too, but a lot of times you can suck it all out, put some brake cleaner in, let it air dry, suck all that out, and then put a new master cylinder. You might not have to buy a booster, but if you got air in the system, it's got to come from somewhere. And unless you worked on the car, and after you worked on the car, that the pedal started to sink and you got problems, it was created by a leak then that you didn't create because you didn't work on it. So something's got to be leaking somewhere, and if you can't see it leaking, it's got to be the master cylinder leaking back in. Because any other leak in your car, you're going to see fluid leaking out where the leak is. That's the only place it can leak where you won't see anything. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.